Today we're going to break down the retirement spending lies that many retirees regrettably fall for. Retirement spending is one of the most misunderstood areas of retirement planning. And as the owner of a flat-fee financial planning firm, I help clients navigate the uncertainty of retirement spending by building simple, flexible, easy-to-follow spending plans. Unfortunately, many retirees too often fall for spending myths that harm or delay their retirement, and in many cases leave them wondering if they could have spent more on the things that matter to them at the end of their life. Today, not only are we going to reveal 3 lies that could hurt your retirement, but we're also going to give you some spending tips that actually do work. So we're just going to get straight into the video. And the first retirement spending lie that I want to talk about today is the fact that many people say you can't spend more money in the early years of your retirement because it will put extra risk on the back end of your retirement. This problem or this myth arises from the use of probability of success retirement planning tools. See, probability of success-based tools create a gamified scoring system that is truly misunderstood and therefore problematic. In design, probability of success-based systems are supposed to improve retirement decision-making. In reality, what actually happens is that they create an incentive for people to delay retirement or to spend less in the early, most youthful years of their retirement. I'm going to show you exactly how that occurs here on the screen right now. On the screen, I've just pulled up a very common, very popular retirement planning tool. This is called RICP, and it is a probability of success or Monte Carlo-based retirement planning tool. And all I want to illustrate here is that no matter the score on the dial here, this 74%, whether it was 50, 80, or 90, when you cut spending in the retirement planning tool or tell the tool that someone will work longer, the probability of success will by default go up because it taxes the retirement portfolio less. Let me show you exactly how that works. If we take the retirement monthly expenses and lower them from $6,000 a month to $5,500, just a $500 per month reduction, we go from a 74% probability to an 86% probability. You might look at that and say, dang, that's the improvement I need, I want, it makes me feel confident. Now, let's do the opposite. Let's put this back to $6,000 per month, and let's tell this tool that this person, Jane here, would work 2 years longer, and instead of retiring at 60, retire at 62. And you can see here that now she has an 83% probability of success. The thing to understand here is that first is a 74% probability of success. That's her original probability. Is that sufficient for her to retire appropriately and responsibly? Quite possibly it is. The question is, does this person need that increase in probability of success? And what does it actually mean? All we're doing by telling the tool that this person will work longer or spend less is telling the tool that it will require fewer retirement assets for this person to last till the end of their life without running out of money. And the really obvious problem here is that this creates a psychological fear and a malincentive that causes people to delay or defer retirement or even not spend as much as they could because all they focus on is the probability of success score. Now, my suggestion is that there is a far better solution, and that better solution is to use a system that I call distribution rate bands. I'm going to show you this on a spreadsheet right now. What I've done is I've actually exported this person's spending desires and assets and thrown them into a spreadsheet so we could see what the distribution rate would be. I actually have 2 scenarios I'm going to show that are unrelated to each other, but they just illustrate the power of using this kind of a spreadsheet-based distribution band tool. What we have in here is a spreadsheet that shows the year-by-year balance of the retirement assets, the required spending from those retirement assets, and the distribution rate as a percentage, and that is what you can see here on this far right column. And what you can see here is that this person has what might be considered a high distribution rate for the first 10 years of retirement, after which the distribution rate drops precipitously from somewhere in the 7% range as an average in the first 10 years to less than 2% for the rest of their retirement. Now, this person might have a probability of success of 75%. In fact, they might have a totally viable retirement with this because they might know that a guaranteed point in time in the future, when certain other income sources kick in or when certain expenses that are predictable drop off, their distribution rate is going to go down substantially as a result, and therefore they can tolerate more risk at the front of their retirement. And the probability of success-based retirement planning tool, or the actual probability of success, doesn't tell you any of this information. I'll show you a second scenario that illustrates this with a little more detail. And what you can see here is a similar distribution rate band that's color-coded. And what happens is this is a couple now. They want to spend money in the first 7 years of retirement before Social Security, and this results in a distribution rate that goes as high as 7.5%. Once Social Security kicks in and subsidizes some of that spending, their distribution rate drops significantly. And then the home is paid off in 2032, and all of a sudden the distribution rate again falls further in a substantial manner. And all this to say is that none of this would be visible just by using the probability of success tool. To understand any of this nuance or these distribution phases, one would have to go deeper and into a spreadsheet just like this. And in fact, many people who might delay retirement or spend less early in retirement because of their probability of success might in fact feel much more comfortable either retiring earlier or spending more as a result of seeing this type of a spreadsheet. Now, even though for this particular lie, I focused on the spending more option, the truth is this lie also deters a tremendous amount of people from responsibly retiring earlier. So I'm actually going to be releasing a video in the next couple weeks that explains why you can also retire sooner than you think. So be sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified when that video is released. And this leads us now to move on to the second spending lie, which is, if I do not stay below the 4% rule, I'm gonna run out of money in my lifetime. I have so many problems with the 4% rule. It's a whole video on its own. I'm just gonna focus on two huge problems in this video. The first problem starts with the fact that the most effective lies have a grain of truth to them. And there is a grain of truth to the 4% rule case. That grain of truth is that it is possible for retirees to run out of money while alive. And not only that, many people anecdotally know a friend or a family member who did irresponsibly blow through their savings. What's not said in the 4% rule is that it's actually extremely unlikely, and this is supported by data, which I'm going to show you on the screen in just a moment, but it's also completely counterintuitive to human behavior. So I'm going to show you in the second on the screen some data that supports both of those claims. But I have a second issue with the 4% rule, and this is more of a values-based problem, less about data. The second problem I have is that the 4% rule plays on fear and satisfies a terrible incentive that the financial services industry has on your behalf, which is that the financial services industry does not want you to spend down your wealth because it will reduce and eliminate the annuitized fees that brokerage companies, wealth managers, and exchange-traded funds and mutual funds can milk out of their clientele. Now, the truth is that most retirees are not going to let themselves run out of money while alive, and the data shows this to be the case. Humans dynamically change their spending behaviors when they see problems happening in the economy or when they realize they're running through their savings faster than they should. And as I already said, there are obviously stories where people do blow through things and irresponsibly don't pay attention, but that's so far outside the norm. The reality is much closer to what I'm going to show you on the screen now. And what I'm showing you on the screen now comes from an article written by a very highly esteemed financial planner and researcher named Michael Kitces. The article is titled, "Why Most Retirees Will Never Draw Down Their Retirement Portfolio." Now, what Kitces writes in this article begins, in a recent study entitled Spending in Retirement, Determining the Consumption Gap, in the Journal of Financial Planning, researchers showed that affluent retirees relying on their portfolios in retirement are failing to even spend their annual income in their retirement years. And actually, the more affluent they are, the worse the trend tends to be. In fact, not only are retirees not fully spending their available income, but their spending begins to decline in retirement. And as a result, using a hypothetical case from the beginning of 2000 to the end of 2008, very challenging time of mediocre returns for retirement portfolios, when in theory, account balances would have dipped with ongoing withdrawals, the average financial assets of wealthy retirees actually continued to increase in retirement. And thus, the researchers identified what is called a consumption gap between what spending wealthy retirees' retirement portfolios could support and the lesser amount that was actually getting spent which in turn left room for the portfolios to continue to grow. Now I'm going to show you an actual slide from his article and continue by quoting what he wrote around the slide. Now Kitces continues, for instance, imagine a retiree who has a $1 million balanced portfolio and wants to plan for a 30-year retirement where inflation averages 3%, and the balanced portfolio averages an 8% return in the long run. And that's what's illustrated on the screen here in this slide. To make the money last for the entire time horizon, the retiree starts by spending a set dollar amount and then adjusts each subsequent year for inflation, and then spending down the retirement account balance over the course of 30 years. As this chart on the screen reveals, projected spending that plans to spend down assets by the end of a 30-year retirement would actually still spend less than the growth for the first 10 years of retirement and wouldn't even dip into the principal until the 17th year out of 30 years. And that's exactly what you see on this graph. The 10-year bubble here is right here, and the 17th year is where retirees actually dip into principal. And this is a case assuming modest 3% inflation and long-term returns of 8%, the average, both of which have been the averages for the past 100 years. Now let me show you a second scenario he includes in the article, which is a more conservative outlook. And it says, he writes, if instead the retiree had a gloomier outlook and projected a balanced portfolio to grow only 7%, while inflation was as high as 4%, their spending would be reduced and the portfolio would peak in year 11, and that's what's circled here. They wouldn't begin dipping into the principal of the portfolio until year 18 in this scenario. Now, he continues to write, notably, in the context of this more conservative scenario, a 64-year-old retiree's life expectancy is actually only until their mid-80s, which means that a significant number of retirees who use the 4% method as their planned retirement spending strategy would actually pass away before they ever materially dip into retirement principal at all. The idea being here, if you retire at 65 and it takes you 18 years to even begin dipping into principal, you're not even dipping into principal until 83, and the majority of retirees actually don't dip into principal at all because they pass before they actually get to that age. Now, Kitces concludes this article by saying, the decision to follow a 4% initial withdrawal rate makes it exceptionally rare that the retiree finishes with less than what they started with at the end of a 30-year time horizon. Only a tiny number of wealth paths finish below the starting principal threshold, let alone run out of money at all. In fact, overall, the retiree finishes with more than double their starting wealth in 66% of the scenarios, and is more likely to finish with 4 times their starting wealth than to finish with less than their starting principal. That means they're more likely to finish with 4 times their starting wealth than to even dip into the principal at all. Now, the task, obviously, after hearing this, is to strike the right balance between spending and preserving assets for later in life. Now, I would again bring us back to the value and use of a distribution rate spreadsheet like the one I'm just tabbed to on the screen here, because this will give you a much more useful method of determining how to balance real-time beginning of retirement spending with saving for later. Using a spreadsheet like the one on the screen here, in tandem with real-time spending tracking tools like EveryDollar or QuickBooks or RICP, where you are able to use up-to-date cash flow and spending numbers, and then you update this type of a spreadsheet and run it once per year, you would get a much better you'd strike a much closer balance to the appropriate level between current day spending and future day spending. Now, we're going to round out this video with the third spending lie, which is that retirement expenses inflate in a straight line manner. I'm going to illustrate what that means on the screen here in just a second. But the problem with straight line inflation adjusted spending models is that they are by far the most commonly used when preparing for retirement and pretty ubiquitously used in retirement planning tools, especially probability of success-based tools. The problem is, unfortunately, straight line inflation adjusted spending is absolutely 100% of the time never accurate and therefore extremely misleading because it causes the probability of success score to get a specific read when in actuality, no one's spending behavior actually models or tracks alongside inflation adjusted straight line spending. Now we're going to show this on the screen here. The truth is retirement spending is actually extremely dynamic. You'll see that as I pull up this spreadsheet here. I'm going to show a couple scenarios in just a second here, but retirement spending patterns change over time as a result of health and age, economic reasons, and even personal preferences. And so straight line inflation adjusted expense models, like the one I'm showing on the screen here, are flat out inaccurate, but they have real life effects on the accuracy of probability of success-based retirement tools, and therefore they influence real people to make real retirement decisions that are not in their best interest. This is what a straight line inflation-adjusted spending model looks like. What happens is in this scenario, this person says they're going to spend $82,100 per year. In year one, they start with that dollar amount, and then every year, the dollar amount is inflated by CPI. Let's say in this case, 3%. And the tool spits out 3% increases year over year over year. And what starts out as $82,100 of spending in year one becomes $97,600 in year 10, becomes $125,000 in year 80, and by year 90, it becomes $160,000. It more than doubles by the 30th year. So this is what inflation-adjusted spending looks like as a straight line. As I said, this is not accurate to reality, and I'm going to illustrate this using actual data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics by talking at a conceptual level. Over here, you can see data that comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2020 Consumer Expenditure Report. And what I'm showing here are the top areas that are spent on by all households in the United States. You can see the top 3 areas of spending are housing, transportation, and food. Now, in retirement, most of those top 3 expenses are going to be reduced at least in some amount. For instance, many retirees will either have a paid off house by the point they retire, or if it's not paid off, will likely pay it off in the early years of their retirement, meaning their housing costs will go down substantially. Not only that, retirees typically retire to stop working and therefore also stop commuting, and their transportation costs, which are the second biggest expense for households, will likely go down substantially as well. On top of that, food being the third biggest will likely go down because there are less dependents or no dependents in the household, and we eat less as we age. So as you can see here, 3 of the mandatory kind of non-discretionary required expenses will all go down in retirement. Now you might say, well, they'll be replaced with other spending, and that's possibly true. They might be replaced with higher costs of healthcare, which you see here in the middle, or maybe higher costs of travel or discretionary spending, which might be under this category of entertainment. The difference is that housing, transportation, and food are required. You can't stop spending on your mortgage or on your commute just because there's a problem in the economy. However, if there's a problem in the economy, you can simply do less discretionary spending. You can spend less on travel, you can give fewer gifts, you can give less to charity, you can do less Roth conversions, right? So there's a difference in the type of spending. I want to show a more practical kind of second illustration of common retirement spending strategies back to this original spreadsheet here. And in fact, all this data comes from Right Capital, which is the retirement planning tool we use at my firm. It's a very good tool, but as I said, there's problems with these Monte Carlo or probability of success-based tools. So what I want to show here is an inflation-adjusted spending strategy where we just use a straight line to a research-driven spending pattern that is kind of more aligned with how people age in retirement. And this is called the retirement spending smile in column D here. The retirement spending smile says that people spend more in their early retirement, that dips as they age, and then peaks again as they near the end of their life because they're going to spend more on healthcare and end-of-life care. And you can see here that if in the green and yellow comparison cells, we can see here that the retirement spending smile actually reduces this person's hypothetical spending by substantial amounts. You can see in year 1, it's exactly level at $82,100 each. But in year 10, the inflation-adjusted plan spends $97,000, the spending smile spends $88,000. So there's about a $10,000 difference. In year 20, there's a $21,000 difference. And in year 30, if they make it that far, there's almost $40,000 spending difference based on this research-driven spending strategy. Now, my opinion is it's better. This retirement spending smile is better, but it's still not that accurate because people don't spend in this robotic, linear, research-driven manner. People actually spend in retirement when they need to spend. And so I have here a third scenario that is what I call the human spending behavior, which is basically like I'm alive, I spend what I need to spend when I need to spend it within some kind of boundaries. And what happens is in this scenario, it's likely that this human spending behavior pattern spends more in the first 10 years of their retirement when they're most youthful, most vigorous, and as needed. And then their spending does follow the spending smile and drop off in a kind of more uniform manner later in retirement as they've aged and they do less travel and fewer discretionary spending. And then the later in retirement these scenarios get, the more closely aligned the different spending strategies align. Now, the main thing to understand here is that the human spending behavior is likely to spend more in early retirement because that is when people want to spend more of their wealth. And then we have this summary table over here that shows a more accurate version of this reality, where it shows that in inflation-adjusted spending, the total 30-year retirement, this person might spend $5,100,000. Based on the spending smile, this research-driven spending strategy, they might spend $4,400,000. And then in the human spending pattern, it's somewhere in between. And the reason I favor the human spending pattern is because it's more human, because people don't robotically follow numbers in a plan. They live and they have real life circumstances that come up and cause them to spend as they need to spend. And so it's very important to understand these. And the point here of showing these is that retirement planning tools that are probability of success based will show a lower probability of success score when using an inflation adjusted spending strategy because it taxes the portfolio more. It'll show a much higher probability of success when using a spending smile that could also mislead someone to be overly confident, when in actuality, it's far likely that it's somewhere in between. To wrap this video up, the concluding point here is that spending lies like the ones I've outlined in this video have very pernicious effects. They really often result in people just like you retiring later than necessary and spending far less than they could. So with that said, if you'd like to learn more about how we at Peak Financial Planning help our clients confidently retire earlier and spend more in retirement, you can visit our website at www.thepeakfp.com. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for your time and attention, and see you in the next video.